Howdy, everyone. I'm going to do this one just a little bit string of thought, which is rather rare for me. Normally, I have to spend way too much time agonizing over the production of a video like this because everything's got to be pitch perfect. But I'm talking about something that isn't perfect and likely won't be for a while, but that I do want to share with you. You see, as many of the people watching this video may already know, or may hope to know by clicking on it, but are certainly going to find out, I've spent the last 5 years writing a vulnerability scanner. And that vulnerability scanner has now gone through 3 separate major iterations, version 1, which I referred to as a pre-alpha, kind of proof of concept, version 2, which was the alpha, which actually had a fair number of users and did work to discover vulnerabilities, which was rather fascinating. Kind of proved that this would really be a thing that we could maybe make take off. And then now version 3, which is the beta. And this version, specifically version 0.3.2, is the first version of the tool that has now been merged straight into the GitHub repository. And that's the first time that there's been a major update that's been accessible to the community in 2 years, because it's taken 2 years to rewrite the entire application from the ground up, from the version that was alpha all the way into beta. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the design decisions that were made in the tool. I want to talk about why I built the tool in the first place and a little bit of what it can do, and probably do a little bit of B-roll on the screen while I'm talking about the different features and such of Sirius Scan. So you see, I've been building a vulnerability scanner called Sirius Scan, and it is MIT licensed, completely open source and free. I did this because I felt like it was just a huge major gap in the cybersecurity community, in both our toolkit and our ability to grow as a community as well. You see, I gave a presentation last year at Wild West Hacking Fest where I said that penetration testers really need to have a vulnerability-centric pen testing toolkit to operate around. And that used to be Metasploit, but because Metasploit was so exploit-focused, we've kind of taken a back seat in our tooling. And that's less than ideal. For both penetration testers and vulnerability assessors, that tooling could be a vulnerability scanner of sorts if the vulnerability scanner was made to work with us and for us. And that's really the objective and the goal of Sirius Scan. It's to be a tactical, operations-focused, open source vulnerability scanner, and therefore you can choose your own direction. By using a bundle of different open source scanners, and having the ability to layer on top of them, maybe adding additional repositories, for example, to Nmap scripting engine, we can take what is already available in open source and the community that is in open source and extend that into something that's truly magical. I think Project Discovery's Nuclei project is very exemplary of this, specifically insofar as we can see how many new vulnerability scanning modules are coming up all the time through and by the open source community in general. And I wanted to build Sirius Scan to provide all of the individual tooling components that a more major vulnerability scanner would kind of layer on top of that. For example, if we're looking at Nmap, Nmap has a GUI called ZenMap. But ZenMap doesn't make Nmap into a vulnerability scanner. Even ZenMap plus Nmap scripting engine doesn't really make it into a vulnerability scanner. You see, if we're looking at a Tenable or a Rapid7, they've got a vulnerability database. So if a vulnerability comes up or is discovered, they can pull from that to provide you insight or information about what that vulnerability actually is. They have agents. They can do service bill of materials scanning. They have big repositories of scanning scripts. They have an engine that can do all of these things. They've pulled all of this together around some kind of interface that is built around a database that understands vulnerabilities intrinsically and then can do risk calculation and more around these things. Sirius effectively takes Nmap and allows you to do all of that within Nmap itself. At the moment, you can kind of think of Sirius as a graphical user interface for Nmap that adds a bundle of extra features and capabilities to it, but that's a little reductive of the objective of the project to begin with, and also its destination, as we'll be adding in additional vulnerability scanners, and there are already some more there, some unique ones, as well as we're using RustScan, for example, as the general port scanning engine. In any case, that's the kind of purpose behind Sirius Scan itself. And now that I finally have it up and running, and it's just as simple as Docker compose up after you've cloned the repository, I actually have found a fair number of vulnerabilities inside of my own home environment. As you can tell, perhaps I've got a little bit of smart home going on here. And yeah, these IoT appliances, they're pretty prone to vulnerabilities. And to have a scanner that I wrote myself find these when I didn't know that they were there or that I was going to be able to find them is actually kind of, oof. After 5 years, it feels pretty good that there's some kind of outcome, you know what I mean? And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that now. This is me nerding out, if you will. You see, I used to be the author of a course with the SANS Institute called Security 460 Enterprise Vulnerability Assessment. And we used Rapid7 Scanner for it, but there was really no open source option. And so like if somebody came to take the course and maybe they worked for a smaller business, maybe an organization with 50 million in market cap or something like that, the likelihood is that they might not internally own a vulnerability scanner. And this is a core utility that you need to have the ability to use. I mean, what are you going to do internally? Use Nmap scripting engine until you get budget for Nessus licensing for the enterprise? This is not exactly a great path towards cybersecurity resiliency or success. And so having identified that, I wanted to build a scanner that could achieve and kind of solve that need. And that's when I got started on Sirius Scan. The first version of the tool was really, really cruddy. It used MongoDB on the back end. It was still a little bit of Golang on the back end. And then on the front end, it was using Electron because I wanted to have an interface that felt a little bit native to the system. I don't think that that was a good call. And there's very, very little of Sirius V1 that still exists in the code base today. But there is one feature that it had that no longer exists, but I do need to add back in because it was quite cool. And that is the ability to take common platform enumeration, CPEs, from NIST, and be able to fingerprint basically a piece of software, attach it to a CPE, and then reverse look that up to generate a full list of CVEs or vulnerabilities that affect that piece of software. This is kind of service bill of material scanning, but it was able to do this directly and natively. This will be a feature that's going to come back into Sirius, but it was cut because it wasn't necessarily required for the MVP of beta. But it will probably be there before version 1, which I'm hoping to launch this summer, maybe at Hacker Summer Camp. We'll see. Let's see. Then there's version 2, the alpha. Or I guess version 1, the one place where you might have encountered version 1 is if anyone's taken that SANS course with me in the past. We actually had a lab where we were doing vulnerability discovery based off of your software and your hardware and software inventory, so your asset inventory effectively. And if you have an asset inventory that you can convert to something like CPEs, then you can then cross-convert those over time into CVEs. That means you can go directly, or with one intrinsic step, I suppose, one intermediary step. You can go from software inventory to list of vulnerabilities to fix. And there's a lab on that in the 460 class that we used Sirius Scan to actually do. Sirius Scan version 1, that is. So you might have encountered it in that situation, but outside of that, the tool didn't really do all that much. And then we got to version 2. You see, after version 1, I learned a whole heck of a lot of things. Especially how to program a little bit better, let's say. Because having come from Python 5 years ago, that was a little bit of a journey. In version 2, it had a much more robust React.js front end, including user controls. You could log into it. You had user management features. It had a web UI. It was MongoDB still, and this becomes important in just a little while. And it worked. It actually worked pretty well. I had a fair number of other folks out there on our Discord who would just come in and they'd be like, "Hey Matt, I ran this in my environment and I found tons and tons of vulnerabilities. Here's a screenshot. Thanks for the tool." And that was just super duper sick. But there were a lot of problems with this version of the tool. I was using a bundle of different web application frameworks because I didn't want to redo it myself. And I think that there was a bit of a code change paradigm over the last 10 years, where in the past you didn't want to repeat yourself, you didn't really want to reinvent the wheel, so you might use something like MUI for your front-end development. And then these days, the entire opposite is true. Like if you're going to do some development, if you're going to be a coder, you may as well just code. It's not that difficult. And so from the front-end perspective, you see a lot of change from those CSS frameworks, like, or I guess change from more heavy UI frameworks down into more CSS-focused frameworks like Tailwind. And so in the latest version of Sirius, everything was completely re-architected to follow the most modern style of design paradigms that we could. In version 2, that alpha version, it was using MongoDB, a document database. And this means that if you want to find all vulnerabilities in the environment, when your vulnerabilities are actually attached to host documents, you have to go through every host document, pull out the vulnerabilities, and you have to dedupe them. And you maybe want to sum them if you're trying to do vulnerability statistics. And you probably want to put that in a separate document so that you can cache it. And you get into a really big problem around performance here. So alpha worked, technically, but there were some design decisions that were less than ideal. And so in the beta, that is completely flipped, and all of the decisions around design and even choices were made with a lot of intention. Though there's maybe one adjustment that will be made perhaps in the future. So that is to say, in the newest version of Sirius, we are back to SQL, baby. Absolutely. And that's pretty standard for just a lot of use cases. Much of the industry has gone from document databases back into SQL databases. But this time around, there's a lot more involved as well. So we've got architecturally a message queue that can communicate between the different components of Sirius. And Sirius is actually a conglomeration of different microservices that are all Dockerized up. There are 3 core services to Sirius: the UI, so that's the user interface, which is written in Next.js. For the front end, use a little bit of TRPC to make that communication chain work as well. And then there's a Sirius API, which is written in Go. And there is also the Sirius engine, which is also written in Go. To communicate between these 3 things, you can either communicate through the API or through the message queue, which is powered by RabbitMQ. There's also a Redis memory resident cache, though it's technically not Redis, it's using Valkey. I've made the most open source Linux Foundation recommended choices for tooling here as possible to avoid things like licensing issues, which you would get into with Redis having changed their license last year, for example. And then for the database, the SQL database, I'm actually using libsql, which is a full rewrite of SQLite, and it also has the ability to be serverless SQLite. Or servered as well. And that's actually what it's doing. It's got a libsql server, which is SQLite on the back end, but it is extremely, extremely fast. And it also allows itself to be swapped directly out for, say, local SQLite storage if we'd like to, or just push it to the cloud via Terso if that was a desire, which is really, really cool. That might allow for some really interesting cloud deployments of Sirius in a pseudo-serverless fashion between something like a Vercel and a Terso simultaneously. That's not really here yet, but if there were to be a Sirius cloud, that's kind of how the design choices on the back end might allow that to be facilitated a little bit more easily, which is kind of cool to see it all come together. What else about Sirius? I don't know. This has been a passion project of mine for such a long time. It's really kind of hard to get it all out, but it's come a long way. I guess the roadmap is really the next thing to talk about. So the roadmap for Sirius here is I'm trying to get version 1 out over by the end of the summer. And version 1 is going to have a lot of things to it. So at that point, we'll have a network scanner that has more than just Nmap in it. Nmap Rust Scan, Nuclei, HALS, the intrinsic built-in scanner into Sirius as well. And it's also using Lua. Lua has been chosen as kind of the scripting language for Sirius alongside PowerShell. And that's because Sirius is also coming with an agent. That agent should launch in the very beginning of March, beginning to mid-March-ish. And what the agent does is it allows you to do template scanning for vulnerabilities on a local systems, similar to the way that Nuclei works, which will be very, very powerful for open source authenticated scanning. Because right now on the open source side, there's just really no authenticated scanning options out there, or at least not very good ones. Because while something like Nmap Scripting Engine theoretically can do authenticated scanning, it does it on like a script by script basis, which is not just weird, but it's kind of unhelpful. And Sirius should help with that. To wit, in fact, Sirius should, by the end of this month, become about the best UI that you could possibly imagine for Nmap Scripting Engine, because it should allow you to get more insights into the script database within Nmap. You should be able to add in third-party repositories to it as well. Sirius is also going to have some integration with artificial intelligence, specifically tooling called Vulnerability GPT. And what that'll allow us to do is increase the amount of information that is in the vulnerability output so that you're dealing with a lot more data than what the default NVD would provide. This will allow it to compete much more directly with things like Rapid7, Nexpose, and Tenable, etc. I also believe that vulnerabilities are more than just CVEs, and Sirius keeps that in mind. So I've got two projects to that effect. The first one is I've got a goal to, by the end of this year, have Sirius pretty close, maybe 80% coverage of the known exploited vulnerabilities list from CISA. That'd be a very powerful, I think, ability to say that Sirius is competitive versus the mainline vulnerability scanners when it comes to the known exploited vulnerabilities in CISA's list. I think that makes it qualitatively robust. And the other thing is, there's another tool out there written by a friend of mine, Jeff Pamerlo, called Crypt Breaker, and it does password auditing. And I find that password auditing is a fantastic pathway to discovering vulnerabilities while doing a pen test or vulnerability assessment. It's a very tactical approach, and I think that fits in with the ethos of Sirius Scan very directly. And it's those kind of things and an app marketplace inside of the tool itself to allow for those kind of things being added in by the community that I think will really make this a powerful tool, because the real bones are now there, and those bones were the thing that took me 5 years to make. The vulnerability database that understands vulnerabilities intrinsically, right? So you've got normalized relationships between hosts and vulnerabilities in the tables. You can query for this kind of thing. You can just add to it. And Sirius, by the way, comes with a full software development toolkit, so you don't have to do any of those kind of things yourself. They're just functions that you could call and then leverage. And that is if you were trying to contribute to the project itself, which it's open source, would love that. But more to the point, it means that for my future contributions, all of those development libraries are now in place, and it means that the tool can suddenly start to take off and see massive improvements in very short periods of time. And I'm really, really looking forward to that. In any case, that was my TED Talk on Sirius Scan. It is now up. It is in constant development. Expect bugs on the beta repo, because it is absolutely the dev beta repo. It'll start to get more stable over the course of the year, and by the summer we should have a 1.0 version, at which point the repo should always work, theoretically. Knock on wood. But for the moment, do note that the repo is probably going to be rather unstable. Feel free to put issues on that repo. I do see them, and I am working through them. Though note if it's an instability that just came up real quickly because I'm pushing things rapidly, just check the commit times, because it might be something that I'm in the middle of working on as we speak. In any case, thanks for listening to me. Thanks for tracking on the project. And if you saw me at Wild West Hackfest, put something in the comments and say hi so I can say hi back. If you didn't see me at Wild West Hackfest this past week, still say something in the comment. Don't be a stranger. Let me know if this is a project that interests you at all, because the more interest there is, the more of my time I'm able to dedicate towards actually bringing this to bear. So again, thanks for taking my time. Thank you for your time, and happy hacking.